A 63-year-old woman arrived home to find her daughter and her boyfriend, both minors, locked in a room. Surprised and angered, she confronted them about their behavior. What no one could have imagined was that this argument would escalate into a violent fight between the couple and the mother, resulting in a scenario akin to the most horrific horror movie. Vilma Gabriela Niño de Guzmán de la Rosa was born in Peru in the late 1940s. She married José Tejada Ramírez, a man 21 years her senior. José had an older son from his first marriage. After they started living, he increasingly started distancing from his previous family, including his son. Vilma had a strong and reserved character. In contrast, she was a woman who reserved all her tenderness and dedication for the plants in her garden. Caring for them meticulously, talking to them and observing them daily was an activity that offered her unparalleled peace. When she finally felt the call of motherhood, it was not easy for her to fulfill her dream. José was over 70 years old while she had already passed her most fertile age. However, she was not one to give up easily. Thus, the couple decided to undergo fertility treatment. Finally, after a long struggle, at 49, Vilma received what she considered the best news of her life. She was pregnant. Later, when the couple learned they were expecting a girl, José felt tremendous joy. It seemed like a miracle, one he could never have imagined at his age. For her part, Vilma promised to be the best mother possible for the child. The little girl came into the world at the start of the new millennium, and they named her Stephanie. Healthy, rosy-cheeked, and cheerful, as the girl grew, she confirmed to her parents that the decision to have her had been the best. With her smile and vivacity, awakened in both a new energy and tenderness they had not known before. Over time, the girl proved to be very coquettish, feminine, and a fashion lover. Although the exact date is unknown, José suffered a stroke. While he survived, the aftermath was significant, as José was left disabled and was later diagnosed with senile dementia. Meanwhile, Vilma had to face raising her daughter alone. Her ambition was for Stephanie to become a righteous woman and, hopefully, a future doctor in medicine. However, as often happens, Stephanie's entry into puberty brought changes in her behavior. It was 2012, and suddenly, the once sweet and warm girl began showing signs of rebellion. As expected, this transformation also disrupted the mother-daughter relationship. Suddenly, that residence became the scene of constant confrontations that grew more frequent over time. Most of these fights occurred when Vilma forbade her daughter from going out with friends. For Stephanie, being locked up at home was tormenting, even perceiving it as a prison. In April of that same year, the young girl took an interest in another student from her high school named Fernando. He was a fairly calm boy, with many friends and no history of violence or rebellious behavior. When they met, it was love at first sight for him. Stephanie was not only a beautiful girl, but also confident and decisive. Thus, they quickly became a couple. At 15, Fernando felt on top of the world, capable of anything. But sometime later, everything changed. By the end of 2012, the relationship between the teenagers was tumultuous, as evidenced by a letter that Stephanie wrote to him. In her own handwriting, the young girl boasted of knowing her own charms perfectly, making it clear that if he didn't measure up, she could easily replace him with another boy. Although Vilma learned of her daughter's relationship, she initially tried not to interfere. After all, she believed it was likely just a fleeting, insignificant romance typical of Stephanie's age. But months passed with no sign of the affair ending. Meanwhile, Stephanie took control of the relationship, knowing how to dominate Fernando. She liked to give orders and, of course, to be obeyed. When this did not happen, she punished him, scratching him, justifying it by saying he well deserved it. Far from leaving her or at least reacting, Fernando endured the situation, hopelessly in love, to the point of even setting aside his preferences, dignity, or social life. Because by then, the relationship also distanced him from his friends. Judging by some leaked text messages, the young man felt lost and, in essence, suffered greatly after each fight with his girlfriend. An example of this is an audio message Fernando sent to Stephanie at 2 a.m. on January 6, 2013. Besides showing how insecure he was regarding her feelings, Fernando said some quite worrying things, talking about ending someone's life and seeking his girlfriend's support for these ideas. Although it was not clear to whom Fernando was referring, it was true that around that time Stephanie had started flirting with other young men. And of course, in the school environment, the news quickly spread. Upon hearing the rumors, Vilma opposed the relationship between her daughter and Fernando. This became the cause of countless fights. Refusing to obey her mother, Stephanie continued to see Fernando in secret. On Saturday, January 11th, 2014, just before noon, the girl snuck her boyfriend into her house. They then went up to the second floor, to her room, where they locked themselves in to watch TV and later had an intimate encounter. When Fernando's father noticed his son's absence, suspecting he had returned to Stephanie, he began calling him on the phone. Distracted, or perhaps anticipating his father's reproaches, Fernando did not answer. However, his father was not willing to give up, so he went to Stephanie's house to look for him. Once there, the man's shouts made Vilma come out of her room on the first floor. Although she ignored him and did not open the door, she immediately understood what was happening. Filled with anger, Vilma went upstairs and, without a word, broke into the room where her teenage daughter was with her boyfriend. It was at that moment that a fight broke out between the three, but it was an unequal struggle, as Fernando soon managed to immobilize the woman. At that moment, Stephanie delivered a strong blow to her mother's head. The force was such that Vilma fell to the floor, dying. Immediately after, the teenager placed the body under her bed, then Fernando and she went to the bathroom to clean themselves. At 90 years old and with senile dementia, Jose heard nothing and was unaware of anything. After that, Fernando went home. Later that same day, Stephanie kept in touch with dozens of people through her social media accounts. She confessed she felt that her heart was at peace and that her problems had finally ended, expressing the pleasurable feelings she was experiencing without specifying the reason. From that moment, Stephanie moved into her mother's room, which was about 10 meters away from hers. Additionally, she took the savings Vilma had, just over $10,000, and went on a shopping spree, spending as she pleased. 48 hours later, she posted a photo taken with her cell phone camera, in which she appeared wearing short floral pants and a pink blouse, holding a small puppy she had just bought in her right hand. She also paid for a change of style. As days passed, the teenager remained calm, even with her mother's decomposing body in the house. She continued to party with friends on several occasions. Jose, due to his health condition and advanced age, did not receive the care he needed from his daughter. When the smell from the second floor became unbearable, she and Fernando sprayed the room with various cleaning products and insecticides. They also partially covered the stained wall with black paint. Meanwhile, despite not being particularly friendly with them, the neighbors noticed that Vilma had not been seen watering the plants in her garden for a while. On January 16th, Stephanie called Fernando to tell him that 3 people were going to help her take out her mother's remains. According to his later testimony, Fernando suddenly felt a great repulsion towards his girlfriend, almost as if for the first time he fully understood what kind of person she was. He then decided to end their relationship. Although he no longer communicated with her or saw her, Stephanie tried to contact him in any way possible. Realizing that her text messages and calls were not being answered, the minor spoke with Marco, a cousin of Fernando's, and through him, she sent messages via one of her social media accounts. There, with encrypted messages, she asked him not to do anything foolish and not to say anything about what had happened. By that time, Vilma's loved ones had tried to contact her without success. Every time they asked Stephanie, she gave some excuse. After some time, they stopped believing her explanations and began to suspect that something had happened to her. In early March 2014, Vilma's relatives reported her strange disappearance to the authorities. Consequently, on the night of Sunday, March 9th of that year, the police arrived at the house with them. When they did not receive a satisfactory response from Stephanie about her mother's prolonged absence, the officers broke into the property with the family's authorization. Once inside, they found Stephanie nervously giving them the runaround in an attempt to hinder the authorities' progress. But the young woman's efforts were in vain, as the strong smell and the flies buzzing all over the place only heightened the police's worst fears. Upon turning the key to the room, the macabre scene was revealed in a matter of seconds. For 57 days, Vilma's body had been there, in the room of the daughter. Forensic experts at the scene found a knife, which was taken for analysis to determine if it had been used to kill Vilma. The authorities immediately considered Stephanie the main suspect in the crime. However, in her version of events, she tried to absolve herself of any responsibility and accused Fernando. Within minutes, reporters swarmed the surroundings of the house. The head of the Criminal Investigation Division informed the press of what was known so far, based on the minor's statements. Thus, both the motive and the cause of Vilma's death were still under investigation. The 65-year-old woman's body was transferred for forensic examinations. Meanwhile, news cameras managed to enter the house and obtained images of the teenager's room. There, marks on the floor were still visible, despite the presence of several bottles of different elements, presumably used to erase them. It wasn't until the following day, Monday, March 10, 2014, that the police formalized the request to initiate a process for violation of criminal law for the crimes committed by the 14-year-old minor. Consequently, Stephanie was forced to remain in a juvenile center for the duration of the process. In the early hours of Tuesday, amidst the tumult of reporters and neighbors, agents transferred Stephanie as some of those present shouted accusations at her. Due to her status as a minor, she wore her face semi-hidden with a cap. Nevertheless, she took advantage of the cameras and microphones to defend herself. During the police interrogation, Stephanie added more details to her version of events. This time she said that her mother became enraged upon discovering her with her boyfriend and then hit her with an iron bar. At that moment, Fernando came to her defense and attacked Vilma, injuring her in the left eye. They struggled, and then he pulled out a knife. She took the blade from him and tried to attack him, but he crawled away and with another blunt object hit Vilma 3 more times in the head. The story continued with Stephanie going to the bathroom to clean the wound her own mother had inflicted on her. By that time, Vilma was already showing no signs of life, and Fernando also approached the sink to wash off the traces of the crime they had just committed. In conclusion, Stephanie only admitted to hiding the body. A few hours later, after being summoned by the authorities, Fernando appeared at the police station to give his testimony. He arrived accompanied by his father and his lawyer. The detectives heard from the young man that all responsibility for the crime lay exclusively with Stephanie. Furthermore, Fernando claimed that the girl was tired of the constant physical abuse she suffered at the hands of her mother. The boy recounted that the teenager used the same bar with which her mom had hit her several times. However, Fernando's version did not convince the police either, as he made serious contradictions during the interrogation. Consequently, the police decided that the young man should be held as the suspected co-author and accomplice of the homicide. It was up to the prosecution to decide whether to charge him. On the afternoon of March 12th, 60 days after the crime, Vilma's body was removed from the morgue and was taken directly to the cemetery, where she was buried in the presence of family and friends. One of the victim's nieces called for the maximum penalty for the two minors involved, adding that for teenagers, it seemed all too easy to kill without facing responsibilities. She also mentioned that Stephanie was very much loved by her mother and denied there was a bad relationship between them. Meanwhile, the prosecution's decision led to Fernando's arrest. The teenager was placed in a juvenile center. Experts concluded that he was a young man with a tendency towards introversion, easily influenced by a figure that generated emotional attachment. They also indicated that Fernando submitted to his partner's wishes, allowing himself to be manipulated to satisfy her desires, showing himself submissive and compliant out of fear of emotional abandonment. Regarding Stephanie, forensic psychologists saw that the young woman had psychopathological traits in her personality. Amidst the twists and turns of the case, a television report revealed that Stephanie had been influenced by another girl who was in prison for killing her mother after a heated argument on March 5, 2005. It was also stated that Stephanie stored poems of her on a tablet or personal computer. At the end of March that same year, Stephanie insisted on her innocence through a letter. There, she explained that when she misbehaved and did not obey her mother, she was hit with a towel or a notebook, but not with an iron bar. An unexpected twist was her portrayal of Fernando, whom she accused of mistreatment and threats, even against his father. The reason was simple. He was obsessed with her and aimed to socially isolate her. Lastly, she assured that she loved and respected her mother and was overwhelmed with sadness from missing her father so much. In this story, Jose too was a victim of circumstances, even though he was unaware of what was happening around him. The elderly man was left at the mercy of Vilma's family. When the firstborn finally learned of the crime and traveled from Brazil, he found that Vilma's family refused to let him see his own father. After turning to the authorities, Jose's son was finally able to rescue him. He found his father in a state of neglect and uncleanliness, and they were unable to find his documents anywhere in the house. Consequently, his lawyer reiterated his request for the relevant agency to expedite the delivery of this documentation. Without it, neither Jose nor his son could claim his pension. The entire country remained attentive to any new detail, even those concerning the daily life of the main suspect. Once transferred to a new center, Stephanie made headlines again when it was revealed that she shared a third-year classroom with another minor accused of a similar crime, Rosalinda. Her case was also highly publicized in Peru. The young girl, who had suffered excessive abuse at the hands of her mother, retaliated against her and took her life. The director of the juvenile center told a Peruvian TV program that the two girls had no problems adapting to the group and also showed acceptable performance. According to her, as part of her job, it was not her place to judge them. Instead, it was necessary to do everything possible as a system to reintegrate them into society. The young women could be confined there until they turned 20. As Peruvian law only imposes a maximum of 6 years of readaptation in juvenile centers for crimes committed by minors. For adults, The country's legislation imposes up to 35 years of effective imprisonment for those responsible for these crimes. On the night of Thursday, April 10, 2014, the crime reconstruction took place. During this, the young woman smiled, made victory gestures, and showed no remorse. Fernando also participated, but, unlike Stephanie, chose not to speak to the press and preferred to hide his face, wearing a bulletproof vest at all times. Both arrived from their respective juvenile centers and had no contact with each other during the procedure. However, coldly and without showing regret, they attacked and accused each other. Upon leaving the scene, Stephanie began to play with her hair as the cameras from photographers and television stations focused on her. Meanwhile, Fernando's defense argued that the accusation against their client was full of contradictions. The psychological assessment of the crime scene, conducted by experts, found evidence of cruelty, planning, and simulation of the events, including the use of air fresheners and wall paint to hide blood traces. Days later, Jose visited his daughter for the first time. Still coming to terms with the events and remembering little, he hoped Stephanie would tell him everything. After leaving, following a 2-hour visit, he mentioned that his daughter blamed her former boyfriend for the crime, insisting to him that she was incapable of such evil. Jose carried with him a gift from his daughter, a pink heart saying she loved him. In the second half of April 2014, Stephanie's situation worsened when investigations into her cell phone uncovered threatening messages she had sent Fernando. These texts were retrieved by the young man's family for use in court, aiming to prove that Stephanie had planned the crime. By the end of July 2014, the prosecution formally charged Stephanie as the perpetrator of her mother's murder, with Fernando deemed an accomplice to the crime. In both cases, the public ministry requested 6 years of detention in a juvenile center and a compensation payment of $1,300. The prosecution's conclusions were based on the autopsy report, psychological assessments, and the crime scene psychological appraisal. Exclusive footage of Fernando in court was captured by a television camera. Walter, Fernando's father, was outraged by the verdict, insisting that there was no evidence incriminating his son. He believed that the inability to absolve Stephanie led to Fernando being charged as an accomplice. Contrary to the father's hopes, in October 2014, Fernando was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison, while Stephanie received a 6-year sentence. After serving their sentences, Stephanie and Fernando were released, with no further updates on their lives made public. Yet, in Peru, the memory of this shocking story lingers, a story of a daughter whose miraculous birth filled her parents with joy, only to later become a figure far from the angel they had dreamt of spending their final years with. Once again, dear audience, I thank you for your company. If you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is Unreal True Crime. Until our next episode, good night.
Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions, and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The horrible case of Elliot Rodger. Elliot Rodger was born on July 24, 1991, in London, England. His parents were Peter Rodger and Lee Chin Rodger, both very young at the time of conceiving the child, and while growing their professional careers, Peter was dedicated to photography, but dreamed of becoming a renowned filmmaker in Hollywood. Lee Chin was a young woman from Malaysia who had come to the United Kingdom to work as a nurse on film sets. Thanks to her job, she had the necessary contacts to fantasize about the idea of moving the family to the United States, where big dreams come true. George Lucas, no less, was a close friend of Lee Chin. In the years following after Elliot's birth, the family prepared for the big move, and after the arrival of their fourth member, Georgia, in 1996, they finally embarked on the journey that changed their lives. That year, the four of them took their belongings and settled in California, close to movie stars and huge recording studios. A new chapter in the life of the Rogers began. However, not everyone was pleased with this change. For the first time, sadness appeared within Elliot. For him, the happy days had been left behind in London. But after a brief period of adaptation, he was ready to become the happy child he once was. When it was time to start at his new school, his limited social skills became evident. Elliot was extremely shy and rarely had the courage to approach other children, to start a conversation or join a game. In these situations, it was his mother who intervened and invited some classmates over to play at the house. Then, everything would go normally, and Elliot seemed to integrate easily. Although there were numerous moves, after a while, the Rogers found their place and began to form bonds in the country they had arrived in. The adults had their friends, their dream jobs. Elliot was doing well in school. Everything seemed to be going as planned. But the dream was short-lived. By the time Elliot turned 7, the fights between Peter and Lee Chin became more frequent. The situation became unbearable, and after a few months, the couple decided to separate. This event significantly affected Elliot's emotions and behavior. The child began to feel resentment towards his father, especially when, shortly after, he introduced him to his new girlfriend. He couldn't believe what he was doing to his mother. He refused to go to his father's house because he was hardly ever there, and he had to spend time with his father's new girlfriend, whom Elliot felt was trying to impose rules as if she had authority over him. But other, more important issues were on his mind, and soon his parents' breakup became a secondary concern. What really obsessed him was figuring out how to make friends and be seen as a popular kid. He observed from a distance the behavior of the classmates he admired, wanting to emulate their appearance so others would notice him. Until that point, he had felt invisible everywhere except at home. At home, his mother indulged all his wishes and whims, but outside, he felt that no one acknowledged his existence. He did everything within his power to change this, seeing that his father, a good and successful man, had quickly found a new woman. Elliot concluded that this was the way to stand out among people and eventually become a great seducer. He asked his parents for permission to dye his hair blonde, changed his outfits to urban clothes, like those worn by skaters, bought a skateboard, and started practicing. His plan seemed to be working. For the first time, he felt he could find a group of friends on his own, without the need to talk too much. But at the same time, he was not so good with physical skills. There was always someone better than him. This discovery filled him with hatred. This was the first time he began to experience envy and jealousy. Others seemed to fit perfectly into the world, but for him, it seemed an impossible task to accomplish. Unfortunately, this thought began to completely take over his mind, plunging him into a vicious cycle of resentment. By the time he reached adolescence, his obsession took another turn. The idea of getting a girlfriend and losing his virginity began to occupy his head all day. He knew that day would come. Each day, his group of friends demanded him to do something he didn't want to do. He himself claimed that he was desperate to catch the attention of women, to receive the love that had been denied to him so far, to lose the virginity that made him look as a loser. Time kept passing, and he was still unable to achieve his goal. He couldn't understand why women didn't notice him, why they didn't choose him and preferred to go out with unoriginal boys, only dating good-looking guys whom he considered stereotypes. After constant frustrations, which accumulated from failed attempts to relate to other people, he immersed himself in the world of video games. There, he found an escape from the harsh reality he faced daily. He distanced himself from the few friends he had managed to make with the help of his mother, and fully delved into the parallel universe of role-playing games, losing interest in everything else. At school, they began to bully him for being the quiet and calm boy, and also mocked him for his fear of talking to women. When the situation became unbearable, his parents decided to change his school. However, this measure turned out to be even worse, as he was sent to a school with a larger number of students than the previous one, which caused him overwhelming anxiety. At that establishment, he also suffered bullying from his classmates. He then begged his parents not to send him back to that place. Complying with his request, they decided to send him to a smaller, part-time institution. Elliot felt more comfortable there, but still, none of his classmates were to his liking. The hatred for people was already entrenched in him. He saw himself as superior to others, who were incapable of noticing him. For this reason, he believed he was doomed to a lonely and miserable life, while other boys his age lived their lives fully, partying, having intimate relationships, and socializing with friends. The envy and jealousy he had begun to feel during his childhood took over his body, filling him with fury and hatred towards all humanity. These thoughts led to several episodes of crying where he expressed being fed up with his life. The experiences that had led him to constant frustration and the new family his father had formed eventually plunged him into a deep depression. Although he refused to leave his room, his parents decided to take him to a psychiatrist. The professional prescribed medication, but Elliot refused to take it, insisting he was not sick. Nevertheless, the first signs that something was not right began to appear. When it was time to go to university, his parents thought it would be a good idea for Elliot to live on the campus of the University of California. Perhaps being away from his family, the boy would find a way to relate to people his age without the intervention of his mother or any other adult. However, once again, the plan did not turn out as expected. Elliot lived with other classmates, but he didn't even engage in conversation with them. He found it impossible to share his space with others. Everything seemed to be an attack on him. Moreover, reality hit him hard again. The city where he lived was full of young people having fun day and night, walking hand in hand with their partners, and he couldn't even approach anyone. He then thought that, although he hated them, the only option to get a girlfriend was to become like one of them. He took advantage of his parents' good economic position to build a personality based on wearing designer clothes, driving a high-end car, and flaunting the money he had, to be seen as a sophisticated, cultured, and fascinating man. To do that, he had to become rich, and the easiest way to do it was by betting on lottery tickets. He invested the money his parents sent him, learned gaming strategies, and dedicated his time to achieving his goal. But once again, his plan did not come to fruition. It was impossible for him to contain the rage he felt seeing others have the life he desired and believed he deserved. He then began to frequent websites to learn how to seduce women. By clicking on some alternative links, he arrived at a portal where hundreds of men in the same situation shared their frustration and blamed women for their discomfort. However, he saw these men as losers and did not feel he belonged to that category either. His insistence on fulfilling his whim seemed to have no end. On one occasion, learning about a party organized at one of the fraternities, he took the courage to go, even though he had not been invited. Beforehand, he drank vodka in his university room, and then went to the place. When he entered the house, he saw people talking among themselves. But once again, they did not notice his presence. He drank a few more glasses there, hoping someone would approach him. Then he noticed an Asian boy having fun, and anger overwhelmed him. He ran towards him and started shouting and insulting him. How was it possible that this Asian boy had friends, and he did not? People mocked him because he was drunk and did not know what he was saying. Then, by his own will, he left that room, went to a balcony, sat down, and watched everyone in solitude, hating them with all his might. Soon, the refuge he had found began to fill with boys and girls. Fury returned, and he started to insult the women, trying to push them off the balcony. However, the boys accompanying them reacted in time, and it was he himself who ended up falling. Injured from the fall, he left the place completely lost in his fury. The next day, he called his father to accompany him to a hospital due to the poor condition of his leg. He invented a story in which he was the victim. This was his breaking point. All the discomfort he had been dragging for years had to be returned to the world and humanity, which had rejected him time and again. He decided he had to take control of the situation. The only way out was revenge. This was how his macabre fantasy took shape and turned into a plan to execute, a plan he called the Day of Retribution. Elliot prepared for months for the day he would finally end his miserable existence. During his time at the university, he had managed to save the money his parents sent him for living expenses to buy weapons that would help him carry out his revenge against humanity. He learned to use them, set a date for the event, and opened a YouTube channel, where days before the attack he uploaded videos detailing what he intended to do. He made sure to narrate his day-to-day life, and the hatred he felt when he saw couples holding hands or kissing in front of him. He claimed it was a crime that some had that opportunity when he wasn't even looked at. It was an injustice perpetrated by a twisted world and humanity. In the videos, he also showed how he drove around in his luxurious car, and at every corner, he found a party of young people having fun, many girls interacting with boys, and how he insulted and resented them. In his original plan, he included the murder of his stepmother and his younger brother for stealing the life he deserved. The date for this terrible event was initially April 26, 2014, as his father would be out of town. However, a change in Peter's schedule forced Elliot to postpone it for another month. Meanwhile, one of the threatening videos Elliot had uploaded to his blog reached his mother. Concerned about what she had just seen, she alerted the police authorities. 2 officers showed up at the door of the apartment where Elliot lived. The young manipulator appeared calm and friendly enough to convince them that he was fine and would not harm himself or anyone else, considering the possibility of ruining everything he had planned up to that point. Elliot decided to expedite his plan on May 23, 2014. He uploaded his last video, titled The Day of Retribution, and simultaneously sent an email to a dozen acquaintances, including his parents, with a 141-page autobiographical manuscript entitled My Twisted World. In it, he explained the reasons for his hatred towards humanity and justified the horrible actions he was about to commit. His targets were women who chose other men and those men who had the fortune of living the life he believed he deserved. Even in his apartment, he stabbed to death 2 of his roommates and a friend who was visiting them while they were sleeping. He then got into his car and drove to a fraternity, where, according to him, the most beautiful women who had rejected him throughout his life were located. He knocked persistently on the door, but no one opened. He then fired his weapon at a group of girls passing by. 3 of them died instantly, while 1 was injured but survived. Elliot got back into his car and drove through the streets of the city, bringing terror to each person unfortunate enough to cross his path. Passing by a store, he fired his gun numerous times from his car without getting out. Suddenly, the police managed to locate the loose murderer they had been searching for minutes. They began to pursue him, exchanging gunfire. Elliot, out of control, ran over people in his attempt to escape until he was shot in the hip, causing him to crash into a light post. Then, in the immense silence that finally enveloped the terrified city, a final explosion was heard, coming from the interior of the vehicle Elliot was driving. When the officers approached, they found him dead with a head wound. In total, 7 people perished that fateful night, including Elliot Rodger. After the desperation and fear that ran through the blood of the witnesses of the tragic event came desolation. No one could believe what had happened on May 23, 2014. The families of the victims were inconsolable at the fatal end of their loved ones. Even his parents could not comprehend the terrible, drastic decision their son had made. Peter Rodger felt the need to publicly apologize to the relatives, and also assured that they had not been able to see how sick Elliot was, as he had been clever enough to hide most of the thoughts tormenting his mind. Although they were aware of his obsession with getting a girlfriend, he had never expressed the hatred he felt for all humanity. Peter assured that he would live tormented for the rest of his days, knowing that his son took the lives of innocent people due to severe disorders that had not been detected in time. Although they were aware of his obsession with getting a girlfriend, he had never expressed the hatred he felt for all humanity. Peter assured that he would live tormented for the rest of his days, knowing that his son took the lives of innocent people due to severe disorders that had not been detected in time. In this account, Rodger recounted that as soon as his ex-wife received the email containing the manuscript, she called him desperately to warn him that something bad was about to happen. They believed Elliot was going to take his own life. They then drove to meet him and convince him not to do anything rash. But by the time they arrived at the place, the attack had already started, and the news from the police was the death of their son and 6 other people. In an attempt to remedy what Elliot caused, Elliot's parents dedicated their days to joining the fight for improvements in the health system and against gun possession. The case of Elliot Rodger demonstrated that once again, an entire system failed to protect people's integrity. When officers arrived at his apartment, they discovered his collection of knives and other sharp objects, as well as his writings and books about mass murderers. Mental health professionals were also unable to recognize that they were dealing with a severe narcissist, an antisocial person lacking empathy, who endangered his life and others, but they managed to deduce it after his act of revenge. What is even more striking is that while for some, Elliot Rodger was a heartless murderer, for others, he represented someone who did justice for people who feel invisible. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.